What do you think makes a meaningful career?
What is the difference? Why you prefer coaching over mentoring? How do we distinguish ourselves from the pack? If you're not at the table, you're on the menu. You know?
And oftentimes our hands have to get dirty. What could be the best outcome for this situation? I'm Michael.
I'm Regine.
And this is Gears in Motion.
Continuing our conversation with our last guest. And so what are the first signs that one is experiencing mental distress? And what do we do to address it as early as possible so that it doesn't really create worse, problems later?
Yeah, I think the early signs can be different for different people. But one thing I want to discuss is imposter syndrome, because that's a phrase that now is kind of a hot term for talking about how minorities are even used for general people that feel that they're not enough, that they can't be functioning at the level that they're at. But I think specifically in STEM, it's the thought that comes in your head that you're not good enough, even if the evidence is completely contrary to that. You just consistently feel like you don't measure up, you're not enough. And I think what happens when that mindset starts to trickle in is that it starts to affect other areas of your life. So I think first signs are that you don't love doing the things that normally give you joy, the things that normally make you happy. You don't have the motivation to do those kinds of things anymore. Or that you feel so incapable of accomplishing something that you end up not being able to do anything at all. It's like, oh, I'm stressed about this project, so then I don't work on the project at all. Like it's kind of the inability to like move, in one way or the other. I know that's definitely a sign that I've seen, for myself during difficult times and for other people where it's kind of like this indecision. And then obviously the symptoms early of anxiety, for some people, literally having panic attacks, literally your heart is beating fast. You're, in situations where you're feeling just stressed all the time, like being sad, crying when nothing's going on. And you're like, what's happening? Like, those are all signs that the stress is getting really high and that you're not able to manage it very well. And when those moments come, obviously the first thing, and it depends on, where you are, if you're in an academic setting or if you're in the industry, either way, you need to talk to someone about it when that starts to happen and it starts to become overwhelming. I think the first step is going to therapy, is meeting someone. And I think for therapy, people are always like, oh, I don't want to see a therapist. I don't want to talk to someone about problems. Sometimes therapy, you need it for a short period of time. You have a time that things are really hard and you kind of need someone to just talk you through mentally how you get through it. And sometimes you need therapy for a longer period of time. Obviously, as a mental health professional, I think everyone should have a therapist because it's great. But but I think that's kind of the first thing, is having someone to talk to about those stressful situations. And when possible, finding someone to talk to that has an identity that aligns with yours, right? It might be that you need somebody that looks like you to talk to because they understand the nuances culturally of what you're going through. It might be that you need someone that identifies with you in terms of your faith background, because your faith informs a lot of how you see the world and how you think about that. So you want to be with a therapist that also, aligns with you and their religious background. There are a lot of different things I think that can even optimize, like the therapy experience as well that people don't think about either. So I think a therapist is one way that you deal with those early signs when they come. I talked about community earlier, but I think being in a group and just having people that you can talk to about things makes such a difference. And honestly, it prevents a lot of the spiraling and like the deterioration of your mental health that can happen. Because when you're talking to people and you're saying things and they're like, hey, that's actually not good that happened to you. Like, who are you going to talk to about that? People hold you accountable when something terrible is happening. They remind you that, no, this is not normal. This is not acceptable. You need to say something, right? So that's why I think community is so important. It's such a unique and important tool. And there's so much, honestly, preventative healthcare, mental health care that can come from being in a community.
Yeah, that's so true. Having others around you that you can talk about things freely. I always joke, one of my really good friends, I always say he allows me to talk crazy and then he reels me back in. Some things, you just, they shouldn't be happening, and you need someone to help support you and saying, hey, I need to elevate this. This needs to be talked about. Words like imposter syndrome, mental health are really gaining traction in the Black community. Where there's a lot more dialogue now, I think, than perhaps there ever has been before, particularly when talking about traumatic experiences. To kind of use that same sort of sleep terminology, what do you think we in the Black community are waking up to, and what do you think we're still sleeping on? What are we talking about more in a healthy way, and what things are we not talking about that we're still shying away from?
Yeah, so I think the like buzzword that we're talking about now is trauma. I think that's like the word that everyone is now like, oh, yes, there's trauma, there's, stress, and therapy is another word. Now people are openly discussing therapy. Like I was listening to an interview. They were talking to Charlemagne the God, and he was saying like about therapy and how he started doing therapy, and he didn't realize that his dad had mental health issues because they'd never talked about it. And his dad, just didn't share all of these things that now he was going through. And he was thinking, well, why didn't we talk about this? Why have we kept everything taboo? So I think in the Black community now, people are just being open and honest more about mental health struggles, about the fact that people are seeing therapists, people are not keeping it a secret anymore, which is making it just more liberating for others to say, hey, you know what, I need therapy too. And everyone is just kind of more openly talking about trauma, which is great. I think we're realizing how much racism and discrimination is traumatizing and how it impacts generations, not just, that individual or that group of people. So I think all of those things are really good. At the same time, I think what's difficult and what's complicated, I think, moving forward is now it's like we're unearthing all of this stuff, and now we're talking about it. Now people want to research it, and there's like all of these forums coming up. But I think what's difficult now is, okay, well, how do we go? Where do we go from here, right? We know that there's all these inequalities and injustices happening. We know there's not enough people of color that are in STEM. There's not enough, there's not enough people in color in any kind of high educational field in general. But I think the problem that we're facing now is that there are so many systemic barriers that are contributing to all of these mental health issues. And that's the area that's really difficult to actually tackle and address. It's much easier, I feel like, to tell people, oh, okay, well, go to therapy, find a therapist. Oh, find a Black therapist if you can. That's great. There are not enough Black therapists, though. There's not enough Black psychiatrists. We now have a huge demand because now everyone wants to get mental health help, but we don't have enough people working in the field. So now we're having this problem where the demand is just so great and the number of workers is just really low. So I think that's kind of going to be the big problem moving forward, because that's going to demand that we do a lot of systemic changes in the educational system and a lot of bigger changes that our country has for a long time not been able to do. Yeah, so I think that's kind of the harder part. That's the next step.
As you were saying, Nadine, sometimes you just need help. There's a sense in which friends are good and we encourage community. And I think none of us would say community is not sufficient and community is not needed. It's definitely needed. But I think, as you were mentioning, sometimes you need some specialized help even outside of what your friends and family may be conditioned or equipped to support. And that's okay. And, you know, having been through counseling myself, I understand that is something that you just sometimes need so that you can there turn around and help and comfort others with the same comfort that you've received, with the same instruction that you've received, with the same perspective that you've received. And it's helpful. Let's talk about pre-career. How do we prepare students while in school? You've been in school a long time. I know I've read your bio. You've been in school a long time and you still got a little bit to go. Mm-hmm. How do we prepare our students while in school to face mental health and to think about their wholeness in a really holistic and healthy way?
Yeah, I think the conversation about mental health needs to be had much earlier. You know, the same way that we talk about physical health and we talk about nutrition, mental health should also be in that conversation, and it should start early as part of, you know, even physical education or part of health class. I think one of the terms that's kind of a buzz term right now is self-care. This idea of doing things to really take care of yourself and being aware of when you need to take a break, when you need to step back, when the pressure is too high. I think those conversations all need to start very early. I think that, you know, sometimes, especially for people that are interested in careers that, you know, require a lot of education and that are rigorous, there can be a lot of pressure that you put on yourself, feeling that you need to be perfect, that you need to get everything done and there's not enough hours in the day. But rest is extremely important to you having mental clarity, to you continue to feel passionate and motivated about the things that you care about. And I mean, as a culture and as a society, rest is something that I think a lot of people were kind of pushing under the rug until the pandemic hit. And then it was suddenly like, oh, why don't we take sick days? You know, why don't we take vacations? Why have, you know, we've been all running like crazy and not taking time for ourselves. And then mental health suddenly started coming to the, you know, the conversation. Oh, we need to take care of ourselves, and everyone's thinking about those things. But I think that conversation needs to happen earlier. It needs to be ingrained in students, can be part of the curriculum for public schools. And then the other thing that I think is important is, so there's something actually called mental health first aid. It's a training that can happen. And the same way that you train people for CPR and for other kind of emergency medical situations, we should also be training, you know, the general population on how to handle mental health crises. So when someone is not doing well and, you know, they're becoming extremely depressed and you're noticing that they're withdrawing, how do you respond to that, right? And the idea of those trainings is that you're not the one that's supposed to go in and solve everything. It's more that you're the one who notices something is off and you know who to contact so the professional can come and take care of the situation. So if we had those conversations more often, then I think things like, because the rate, unfortunately, of suicide is going up, it's like tripling in young adults now, right? We're seeing so many stories of people now that are ending their lives, and everyone is so shocked, like, how did this happen? I didn't see it coming. And unfortunately, a lot of it is because we don't talk about things in the open and we don't talk about them early enough. And it's not part of our general, you know, accepted culture and practice for us to be open about things early on. I'm optimistic. I think things are definitely changing overall as, you know, a population and as a country, but there's still so much further that we have to go. And especially in communities of color, because of the increased stigma of, it's already hard to be a minority. You've already fought to get here. You don't want to appear weak to people. So no one wants to talk about that. No one wants to talk about having thoughts, you know, that get to such a dark place, but we have to talk about it. I don't even remember what the original question was anymore. but
I think you answered it. What do we do at the student stage? How do we train folks to really think about recognizing it early? And I think what you said, being observant is key. And that's just on the front end. I think there's also a role to play as well for those that are within the support community as well.
I think so many communities that you're a part of where you're kind of the first line of defense for mental health things. Obviously, with my background growing up, I think the church is such a place where you see things that sometimes people will say, oh, this is just a spiritual problem. We're just going to pray and this is going to get better. But sometimes there's a lot more going on, and this person is going to need medication. This person is going to need, X, Y, Z that they're not going to necessarily get, just from attending church services. Something that I used to see my dad, talk to people about a lot growing up was he'd come do like a home visit, and the person who was there was actually having like a psychotic episode. Like they actually had bipolar disorder. They were manic at the time. Things were really not going well. And the family would say, oh, well, like, can you just come and pray for them? Like, we think they're possessed. We think there's something going on that's spiritual. And my dad would say, well, why don't we pray on the way to the hospital? Like, why don't we pray as we go to the hospital? And I love that because people are multifaceted. They're complex. There's multiple things going on. Absolutely. But I think that the idea that you can simply pray about things and that's going to solve everything has not helped a subset of people that are really suffering because they have biological problems. And, I think the church is one place where you see it. I think in school, teachers are seeing kids that unfortunately are really sick. Part of it has to do with their home environment is terrible. And teachers also need the support. They need to know, okay, who do I call in this situation? Something is going wrong, right? We have a shortage of guidance counselors because there's such a strong need for them to be there and support children that are having different issues. And sometimes it's not a severe mental illness, it's situational, it's that short period of time they're going through something. But either way, there needs to be a better support in place to help them. I could go on. There's just so many arenas, there's so many communities where this is just so important.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you so much. My next question was going to be, what practical steps really can experienced practitioners like me, can take to help. But I also realized that I never really studied therapy myself until for the first time until 2019. I was really well into my 50s. And I think probably my generation, the most experienced practitioners, actually, not that I have anything against therapy, I just didn't think that I needed it. Just as simple as that. When actually, it became I became painfully aware that I did need to have therapy, and that helped me, to move, after a period of traumatizing events. So I was going to ask how we can help, but I also realized that we are in need of help ourselves. This is Regine.
This is Michael.
Until next time.